I, 31 male, work as a forensic accountant. My job literally revolves around noticing discrepancies, following trails of evidence, and remaining completely objective when things don't add up. You'd think those skills would translate perfectly to my personal life, but love has a funny way of making you blind to the obvious. My ex-fiancé, 29 female, was a marketing director at a mid-sized tech firm. We had been together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months, and living in a house I purchased solely under my name 2 years before we even met. The friction between us didn't start overnight. It was a slow, creeping entitlement that I kept making excuses for. She began expecting me to cover absolutely all of the household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, while she used her pretty substantial salary for luxury vacations with her best friend and high-end designer clothes. I tolerated it initially because I valued peace. I assumed marriage would naturally align our financial goals. I was very, very wrong. But the breaking point wasn't actually about the money. It was about basic respect. It all went down on a Friday night. I had hosted a small dinner party for my colleagues to celebrate a major firm milestone. Ex-fiancé had been drinking heavily since before the guests even arrived. Midway through the main course, she decided to start using me as the punchline for her jokes. She openly mocked my salary compared to her flashy tech industry peers. She sat there and told a table full of my professional associates that my job was just glorified bookkeeping for boring people. I kept my composure. I politely steered the conversation elsewhere and made sure the rest of the night went smoothly. But after the guests finally left, I found her in the kitchen pouring herself yet another glass of wine. I stood by the island, keeping my voice entirely level. I told her the disrespect needed to stop immediately. I explained that humiliating me in front of my peers was entirely unacceptable and that I expected a basic level of respect in my own home, especially from my own partner. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look slightly embarrassed. She just took a sip of her wine, rolled her eyes at me, and laughed. She leaned against the counter with this incredibly smug look on her face and said that I was being way too sensitive. Then she looked me up and down and asked if I seriously thought I would ever find better than her. She told me I was lucky she even agreed to wear my ring, and that if I wanted respect, I should go ask my spreadsheets for it. I just looked at her. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. The clarity I felt in that exact moment was absolute. I said, "Let's find out." I walked straight past her to the hallway closet, pulled out 2 large suitcases, and dragged them into the primary bedroom. I opened her dresser and started transferring her clothes. She followed me into the bedroom, the smug smile completely dropping from her face. She demanded to know what I was doing. I told her I was packing for her. I said she was leaving and that the engagement was officially off. She scoffed, crossing her arms, and tried to call my bluff. She asked if I was seriously kicking her out over a joke, reminding me that she lived there too. I calmly reminded her that I was the sole owner of the property and that she was essentially a month-to-month tenant who paid 0 rent. I told her to consider this her 30-day notice, but I highly suggested she go stay with her best friend for the night because we were completely done. She lost her mind. She threw her wine glass at the wall, right past my head. It shattered everywhere, staining the drywall dark red. She screamed every name in the book at me, grabbed a few overnight things, and slammed the front door so hard the framed pictures in the hallway rattled. 10 minutes later, she texted me saying I would be begging her to come back by Sunday. I didn't reply. I spent my entire weekend packing the rest of her belongings into boxes and stacking them neatly in the garage. On Monday morning, I called the wedding venues, the caterer, and the florist. I canceled absolutely everything. I lost about $4,000 in non-refundable deposits, but honestly, it felt like the best investment I had ever made. By Wednesday, ex-fiancé realized I wasn't playing a game. Her texts shifted from demanding apologies to issuing threats. She demanded I continue paying the lease on her luxury SUV because she had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle during our relationship. I immediately logged into the auto portal, removed my payment information, and blocked her number across everything. That is when her entitlement turned into a calculated, malicious campaign. Ex-fiancé wasn't just going to leave quietly. She wanted to destroy my life. On Thursday afternoon, I was unexpectedly pulled into a meeting with my HR director. He looked deeply uncomfortable. He handed me a printed email. It was from an anonymous address, but the wording and the specific phrasing were distinctly hers. The email accused me of using company servers to look up illicit materials and claimed I had severe, volatile anger issues that made me a physical threat to the women in my office. The HR director told me they had to take the allegations seriously and that they were placing me on paid administrative leave, pending a full IT audit. I just nodded. I told him to pull every server log, every keystroke, and every email I had ever sent. I knew my digital footprint was spotless. But the sheer audacity of her trying to dismantle my career enraged me. I walked out of the office and drove home. I didn't even have time to unlock my front door before a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. 2 officers stepped out and served me with an ex parte temporary restraining order. I stood on my own porch and read the paperwork. Ex-fiancé had gone to a judge and sworn an affidavit under penalty of perjury. She claimed that during our argument on Friday, I had violently cornered her, threatened her life, and thrown a glass at her head. She claimed she feared for her safety and needed exclusive occupancy of our shared residence, my house, to feel safe. Because it was an ex parte order, the judge granted it temporarily without hearing my side, which is standard procedure in domestic violence claims. I was legally barred from entering my own home until the plenary hearing 10 days later. The officer told me I had 10 minutes to grab essentials. I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, drove to a hotel, booked a room for 10 days, and immediately called one of the most ruthless family law attorneys in the city. Here is the thing ex-fiancé completely forgot in her blind rage. 6 months prior, I had installed a high-definition security system to monitor our rescue dog while we were at work. We had motion-activated cameras in the living room, the kitchen, and the primary bedroom. The footage was stored on a secure cloud server. I sat in my hotel room, logged into the portal, and downloaded the video from Friday night. It captured absolutely everything. It showed me standing calmly by the island. It recorded her exact insulting words. It recorded me packing without raising my voice. And most importantly, it clearly captured her throwing the wine glass at the wall in a tantrum while I stood completely still. She had handed me the exact weapon I needed to ruin her. I forwarded the files to my lawyer. He reviewed them and told me not to contact anyone. We were going to let her walk right into a perjury trap. While I waited for the court date, I found myself thinking about Qley. Qley was a brilliant marketing manager at ex-fiancé's firm. Ex-fiancé absolutely despised her. She used to spend hours complaining about Qley's promotions, her outfits, her mere existence. Qley was essentially everything ex-fiancé wasn't: professional, kind, hardworking, and genuinely talented. The morning of the hearing finally arrived. I sat at the respondent's table with my attorney. Ex-fiancé sat across the aisle. She wore a modest, conservative dress and kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She looked exactly like a terrified victim. The judge called the case. Ex-fiancé's lawyer stood up and painted a horrifying picture of me. He asked the judge to grant a permanent protective order and grant his client exclusive use of my residence for 6 months so she could transition safely. My attorney stood up. He didn't argue. He simply submitted a flash drive into evidence and requested to play it for the court. The courtroom fell dead silent as the video played. The judge watched ex-fiancé laugh, mock me, and throw a glass in a fit of rage while I stood motionless. The judge watched me tell her to leave. The judge watched her storm out, completely unharmed. The silence after the video ended was heavy. The judge turned to ex-fiancé, and the color had completely drained from her face. The judge spoke to her lawyer, his voice dangerously low. He stated that his client had submitted a sworn affidavit that directly contradicted the objective video evidence provided to the court. He said she had weaponized the domestic violence statute to facilitate a real estate grab, and he dismissed the temporary order immediately. My attorney then spoke up, requesting a protective order against the petitioner given the destruction of property, the false police report, and the documented harassment. The judge granted it without hesitation. Ex-fiancé was now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me, my workplace, or my home. She was ordered to retrieve her belongings from my garage with a police escort. I moved back into my house that very afternoon. 2 days later, my company's IT audit concluded. They found absolutely nothing, and I was fully cleared and reinstated with an apology from HR. That weekend, I was at a local coffee shop catching up on some work when I ran into Qley. We recognized each other from a few forced corporate events I had attended with my ex. We started talking, and I mentioned the engagement was off. She didn't look surprised at all. In fact, she admitted that ex-fiancé had been a toxic nightmare to work with for years and that the whole office walked on eggshells around her. We ended up talking for 2 hours. The conversation flowed effortlessly. I asked her if she wanted to get dinner the following weekend, and she smiled and said yes. Exactly 3 weeks to the day after ex-fiancé told me I'd never find better, I walked into an upscale Italian restaurant with Qley. We were having a fantastic time. We were laughing, sharing stories, and genuinely connecting. I didn't notice best friend sitting 3 tables away. Best friend had always been ex-fiancé's biggest enabler. She discreetly snapped several photos of Qley and me laughing over a bottle of wine and immediately texted them to ex-fiancé. I found out later exactly how it played out. Ex-fiancé was at a bar when she received the screenshots. Seeing me not only moving on, but moving on with the specific coworker she hated most, completely shattered her reality. The narrative she had built in her head, that I was crying alone, miserable, and missing her, evaporated instantly. She lost all sense of self-control. She completely ignored the protective order, left the bar, and drove straight to my house. My phone started vibrating relentlessly right as the waiter brought out dessert. I had 32 missed calls from an unknown number. Then, the security alert from my house triggered. I opened the app on my phone right there at the table. The camera showed ex-fiancé in my driveway. She was screaming, pacing erratically, and kicking my front door. Then she picked up a heavy ceramic planter from my porch and hurled it straight through my front living room window. Glass shattered everywhere. I didn't panic. I calmly excused myself from the table, stepped outside the restaurant, and dialed 911. I informed dispatch that a restricted person was currently violating a protective order at my address and actively destroying my property. I went back inside, apologized profusely to Qley, and explained the situation briefly. She was shocked but incredibly understanding. I paid the bill, and we left. By the time I pulled into my neighborhood, 2 police cruisers were already parked on my lawn. Ex-fiancé was in handcuffs, sitting on the curb, screaming at the officers. She was covered in dirt from destroying my landscaping. When I stepped out of my car, she completely lost it. She started shrieking at the cops, entirely delusional. He's supposed to be my husband. He's cheating on me with that witch from my office. This is my house. One of the officers approached me. I handed him the certified copy of the protective order I kept in my glove box. He reviewed it, nodded, and walked right back to ex-fiancé. He told her she was under arrest for violating a court order, vandalism, and trespassing. They put her in the back of the cruiser. She stared at me through the window as they drove away, and her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was pure, absolute defeat. She finally realized she had 0 power left. The consequences didn't end there. The next day, my attorney took the anonymous HR email she had sent to my job, the police reports from her arrest, and the video evidence of her perjury, and drafted a devastatingly polite letter. He sent it directly to the chief executive officer and the head of legal at her tech firm. He informed them that their marketing director had used company time and company IP addresses to orchestrate a fraudulent, malicious harassment campaign against a private citizen. Corporate entities do not tolerate that kind of liability. Ex-fiancé was fired for cause within 48 hours for violating the company's strict morality and conduct clauses. Because she was fired for gross misconduct, she received absolutely no severance package. She faced criminal charges for the protective order violation and the property damage. She eventually took a plea deal to avoid jail time, which resulted in a hefty fine, thousands of dollars in restitution for my broken window and ruined landscaping, and a permanent criminal record. Because she couldn't afford rent in our city without a job, she had to pack up and move back to her home state to live in her parents' guest room. Qley, in the ultimate twist of irony, was promoted to fill the vacant marketing director position. We are still dating, and it is honestly the healthiest, most respectful relationship I have ever experienced in my entire life. Looking back on all of it, I don't really feel anger anymore. I just feel relief. People will always show you exactly who they are when they think they hold all the cards. But when you take that power away and just let them dig their own graves, the truth always reveals itself. If you want to see how to legally and systematically dismantle a toxic ex without ever raising your voice, hit that subscribe button. My lawyer fees weren't cheap, and I could really use the engagement to pay off that new front window.